So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but I have to think that for the population at large, right, they've seen all these things happen. They've been convinced, right, and convicted, if you will, that God is moving in their lives, and wanted nothing else to do with it. They wanted to meet all of the requests of the Israelites, including, even before the 10th plague, of course, giving them the gold and the silver, so that they could be compensated in advance. So, picking up in Exodus 12:37. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. They baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of 430 years, to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. All right. So, how many people? How many people you think?
Over 1 million.
Definitely over 1 million. Yeah, the estimate that I saw was about 2 million people. Anybody have a good idea for what 2 million people looks like? How many people is 2 million people? Right? How big is Colorado Springs? 500,000 or less. Yeah. How big is Denver? Denver proper, not the surrounding. Right? I think it's about 1.5, 1.25, 1.5, 1.25 probably. So all of Denver City proper picks up and goes. But it's not just that, right? It would be one thing if the city and county of Denver picked up and walked out the town. That would be quite the traffic jam, right? But what else was it? Livestock, right? All of it. Livestock that had not been affected by the plagues, right? So a full host of their livestock with them, which might not, given that they were enslaved in Egypt, it might not have been necessarily the full complement that they would have had otherwise, or would have if given their own, but not zero.
They're all virus-free animals.
Virus-free animals, huh?
Even if they only had 3 or 4 animals apiece.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't take much. And right. So having animals was more significant then, right? It's not like today where, there might be a few of us with large animals in the congregation. The expectation was every family had their own food source to some degree, or some portion of food. So significant amount of livestock. What didn't they have? Stuff, right? So they didn't bring carts. They didn't bring Don's wonderful kitchen in a trailer, right? They brought very little, what they could carry and carry relatively quickly. All right, and then how long were they there, right? It told us 430 years. And that's fulfilling Genesis 15:14. If you want to flip there, you can go take a look. But in Genesis 15 and 14, it says that you'll be put in the hands of others for 400 years.
We wonder, of those years, how many were spent as guests, and how many years did they spend as...
Right. And remember when this all started, it started in a very positive sense, right? With Joseph saving Egypt, as well as his family, and kind of the birth of the nation thereof. So not all of that in slavery, but how long is 400 years? How long is 430 years? Okay, that seems ridiculous. What else is 430 years old? What else is 400 plus years old? Us, U.S., 420 years since the Pilgrims landed. Okay? So when we think about how many generations, right? Who knows somebody that landed right at Plymouth Rock? Oh, all right. We've got somebody who can trace that far, right? I can't trace that far, right? So 400 plus years, when we think about that in terms of livelihood, in terms of our independence, it's only been 250, right? Keep it together, you two. Dick was a young man on the Santa Maria, right?
Well, I
All
thought
right.
it was a Pinto.
It's the Pinto. Dirt, before dirt was discovered. Great. So 400 years, right? The Israelites had been there for a very, 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 very long time. And like you said, how many of those were in good favor versus poor favor? We get the sense, right, at the end, and we talked about this a little bit last week, that there was never going to be an integration between the Israelites and the Egyptians. So regardless of how long that they would have been slaves or not, they were isolated, right? The Egyptians never viewed them to be a part of their society, even with what they had done.
Goshen, the place where they had lived for all those years, was fairly isolated from the rest of Egypt, although Goshen seems to be the ideal place to grow a nation.
Yeah, it was kind of outside. I mean, it's still, we'll show a picture in a minute. Goshen was where the Israelites were, and a fairly good place to grow up from a nation perspective. Absolutely. All right. So then we're going to kind of skip through a little bit. Exodus 12:43 through 51 is a formal institution of the Passover, right? So we have this break a little bit, right? The Israelites have left, and now we're going to talk about kind of what is being set in place as a result of that. And then we're going to continue the story as they depart. So this is a little bit kind of footnote-ish, but I think important in terms of getting this right and making sure we tie cause and effect. And I think that's important because these three critical things we're going to talk through, they're all established right here, and they're meant to reflect back on what happened, which I think is interesting, and I want us to think about as we get later, all right? These three things are intended to focus explicitly on the slavery, the plagues, the 10th plague, the Passover, and leaving Egypt proper, all right? So, institution of the Passover, no foreigners, family meal eaten in homes, no broken bones, an annual observance, and all Jews are required to participate, right? So that's 10 verses in a nutshell. And we already talked about this a little bit. This gave a little bit more declaration of the rules and the expectations for Israel to follow the Passover. And then we get a section here where we talk about the consecration of the firstborn, okay? The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both of man and beast. It belongs to me." We're going to come back to this in a minute because we skip it, and then we come back, and we skip to the third piece. So the second piece is the consecration of the firstborn, and then the third piece is the feast of unleavened bread, right? So Exodus 13:3 through 10. This is the third memorial or memory-oriented piece, right, requirement as part of these activities. It's in the month of Abib. That's the first month, the sacred month that they started over on, so it matches the timeline. It's not you guys, it's just we need to change the frequency of the mic. Sorry. Got to remove all the leaven from the, is the mic still on? Yeah, okay. You need to remove all the leaven from the house. On the 14th, on the Passover, they celebrate the Passover. 14th to the 21st, only unleavened bread, so full week of unleavened bread. Worship on the 21st, and provided as a teaching opportunity, right? So we think about, we've got the Passover, and the Passover is really focused on God saving and singling out the Israelites, and of course providing a wonderful pattern for us for the future. So what's the purpose of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread? How is this different than the Passover itself? What's the purpose? Oh, really got to screw your thinking caps on this morning.
Ask your question again. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Passover was all about the reminder. So the future memorial of the Passover was all about the reminder of God passing over the Israelites, right? And not the angel passing over and not taking any of the Israelites. So what is the purpose of the Feast of Unleavened Bread? It's a little bit different. Now, Passover, of course, is included in there, but the intent of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread isn't really Passover. This is just telling you when it happens. It's really get rid of the yeast the day before, 7 days without yeast, and then the day of worship. Why is this different than the Passover? To teach what?
The generations
About what?
about what God had done for the Israelites.
Right. And specifically, right, so the Passover teaches them about the Passover. The Feast of the Unleavened Bread is telling them where they came from and how they became the nation, right? It's the leave, it's the cleaving part. So the Passover didn't earn them freedom necessarily, right? It caused Pharaoh to do it, but now the Feast of the Unleavened Bread helps them to answer the questions, where did our people come from and how did we get here? It's about the departure and the separation from Egypt and becoming their own nation. All right? So much more focused on that separation from slavery than the Passover, which was really a key event to get Pharaoh to change his mind. So tied, of course, but I think a little bit separate in purpose. So that's why they've got two different pieces there. And we're going to come back to the firstborn. I haven't abandoned it. It comes back in the text in a few verses. So we're going to read then the next 4 or 5 verses. Exodus 13, verse 11. Now when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanite, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and gives it to you, you shall devote to the Lord the first offspring of every womb, and the first offspring of every beast that you own. The males belong to the Lord. But every first offspring of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, but if you do not redeem it, then you shall break its neck, and every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? Then you shall say to him, with a powerful hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. It came about when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord the males, the first offspring of every womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. So it shall serve as a sign on your hand and as phylacteries on your forehead. For with a powerful hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. All right. So, every firstborn male, okay, is set aside for the Lord, and the intent here is that the firstborn sons, the firstborn men were then given to the Lord, and a sacrifice of a firstborn was made for him. So we're getting this kind of exchange put in place for the firstborn. So what's unique about this sacrifice? We've seen lots of other sacrifices through the Old Testament, right, to get here, and we're going to get a bunch more sacrifices as they set up the tabernacle and the priesthood and all those sorts of things. But these The rules here for sacrifices are a little bit different. Anybody pick up on some of the subtle differences or things that make this unique?
Well, God had saved the firstborn. I mean, if they put the blood on their doorpost, God saved them, but he wanted them devoted to him. And so it's firstborn children, it's firstborn animals.
Yeah, God saving the firstborn created this. This is a super powerful reminder of the role of the firstborn, and God really setting the firstborn apart in Israel.
And then Jesus will come along as the firstborn.
Yep, Jesus. This is another template for Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
Well, the firstborn male inherited much more than anyone else in the family.
Yeah, so the firstborn male received a more significant set of blessings from the family, and I think that may come from this a little bit, but I didn't look too deeply into that piece. But it certainly was something that happened.
The experience of the firstborn for the uncircumcised and the Egyptians, it meant death. Firstborn, in the other case, meant their freedom.
Yep. All right. This is getting higher on my to-do list. I'll blame it on Kevin, though. All right. One thing that stood out to me is that it's a complete sacrifice. We look at some of the sacrifices later, right? And it's take the best parts and give it to God, and the rest shall be for you. But this was all of it.
The whole sacrifice.
Yep, the whole animal, right? Not for you, or not for the Israelites, not for the family, but the whole firstborn was given to God fully. The animal was fully sacrificed. We talked about the firstborn child was redeemed, right? So redeemed through that sacrifice of a firstborn. And that, again, starts to set up kind of that sacrificial exchange, which becomes important, more important as we go. The other interesting thing is that all of them, even the unclean animals, were redeemed. The firstborn was redeemed. And that's in the notes from the lesson, but I don't know how much to throw into that because I don't know if I buy it. I don't know if I saw it in there. So I thought I would hang that out there and see what you guys think. If you feel like that's included or not. It says every first of the womb, but I don't know how people are getting to unclean animals were redeemed, so.
Well, wasn't it unclean, John? It wasn't at this point unclean animals yet. That came later, right?
Right, so the unclean animals came later, for sure, right? So we haven't set that piece aside. And so, we wouldn't expect necessarily for there to be a distinction.
There weren't unclean.
They weren't unclean yet. Yep. I mean, well, yeah, absolutely. So if you want to, in your notes, you could strike that line out because I don't think it's helpful. All right, so there it is. 3 main requirements that are set up first, right? And placed in here intentionally to show their relationship to departure from Egypt. I think it's interesting because we know where we're going, right? We're going to the Red Sea. And these came before that. I'm not sure what conclusion I want to draw from that, but I think it's interesting that the ordinances, the memorials, weren't intended to highlight the crossing of the Red Sea or the crossing on dry land or wherever that was. So put that where you may in your own noggin, but that stood out to me as something interesting. Now, picking up in 17, now when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land or the Philistines, even though it was near, for God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Hence God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial array from the land of Egypt. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. Then they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Right? So this gives you an indication that it's going to take a few days to get where they're going, which kind of makes sense. So here's what it looks like. They were in Ramses, closer to the end of the delta. You see Goshen, we talked about earlier, that being a good place to found a nation. And when you look at satellite pictures even today, it's real green in that little triangle there in the Nile Delta, and everywhere else, it ain't.
It's a place for incubation of a nation.
Yep. They're about to be baked, for sure, wandering around in the desert. So as it notes, that red line in X, right? So they're talking about, God was saying, if we go through the coast, right? The coast is going to be heavily populated because water, of course, and livelihood. And the Philistines were set up there. So I guess this to me speaks to the character of the Israelites, which is really fascinating. He knew the Israelites weren't ready. Well, they weren't prepared for war, but even, he said even seeing it would drive them back to Egypt. So certainly they weren't prepared. They weren't on their own. Either way, the short route was out, right? So the trick then is, and we know they eventually get to Mount Sinai, but I think if we had eliminated the whole golden calf and all of the other things that wind up, that Alex will tell us about in a few weeks, you kind of wonder, if they'd taken that route and down and around and skirt by the Philistines and into Canaan, right? If that would have been something that was a possibility. Not what happened, but nonetheless, that's where they went. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it, by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So what's this? I'm going to use the pointer up there, and it's not going to work. Right? They came down, Migdol, and it said they came down here and turned around and go back to Pi-hahiroth. So I think they probably went a little bit past and came back. At least that's what the text indicates to me. And it's interesting because we see that it's interesting because we think about what God is doing here, right? I mean, why not hop over here and get away from the Pharaoh and off you go? Certainly could have done that, but they did not. So why is God doing this?
God is drawing out the Egyptians and their supply route to capture the Hebrews. And God has a trap.
Yeah, so it's a trap. It's a trap for Pharaoh, right?
One gets the idea that he is actually leading the army.
Yeah, it's a trap for Pharaoh. Pharaoh thinks, or God has told us, that Pharaoh is going to think that the Israelites are listless, right? That the Israelites somehow have no clue what they're doing. So I think this speaks a little bit more to the stubbornness of Pharaoh. I mean, we continue to hark on this, right? And I think, it's easy to get the impression that Pharaoh was just so angry. That's not what it says. I'm certain he was a little bit ticked off, or maybe more than a little bit, right? But what it says gives you the indication that God put the Israelites in a sticky spot and waited to see what Pharaoh would do. And of course, we know what Pharaoh would do, right? He would once again try and take advantage of the Israelites and try once again to break the commitment that he had made. So for whatever reason, I viewed that this time reading through really different.
John,
Yeah.
it's really hard to get your head around moving 2 million people.
Yeah,
They can't run that fast, and it's a slow walk.
yeah, you're right. So they're moving 2 million people. This is good mental picture to set up, right? They're moving 2 million people with livestock, and it is brutally slow. They're carrying what they can. No carts, no Volkswagens, right? They did not have an easy way to move things, and you move at the pace of the slowest thing. I have a friend who's, he's a little, I don't know that he's quite all there. He races burros. Like, that's, like, wow. Of course, and we see that and we chuckle because we know that they're stubborn and they're not fast and they don't do what they told. They are stubborn. And we know that the Israelites have them in their group. But I think the other piece is, right, if you were in this very large group with your livestock and you were to come under threat, how fast could you go? You ain't leaving the donkey. I mean, you think about where they went. They went from the Nile Delta into the desert. They're following the outlet of the Red Sea, but they're in the desert. Where are they going to run to? Where are they going to go? And if you went without your livestock, you weren't eating.
Yeah.
Right? You were you were about to become desert toast.
There would be a lot of dust in the air.
Yeah.
That's 2 million people walking. Easy to spot.
Oh yeah, and you leave a trail. You can't erase a trail from 2 million people. And they're going near populated-ish areas, right? I mean, near the Red Sea, there's going to be some people. So when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, and where they'd fled to, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people, and they said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" And I get the feeling when I read that, it's like, hey, they just went the wrong way. They're going to die anyways. They can't take care of themselves. We were doing better for them than they could do for themselves, right? I get a little bit of feeling of that. So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. So not just 600 chariots, but 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them.
Kind of like light tanks of the day.
Oh, well, yeah. Then they said to Moses, okay. So where are we at? I forgot to put a slide in here.
Well, you're at verse 9, I think.
I backed up. No, I guess did I go forward and then backwards? So he made his chariot ready. Okay. I think this was my apologies. I got confused. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-Hahiroth in front of Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. So
Mud bricks production had stopped.
yeah, no more mud bricks. It wasn't just the Egyptians that changed their minds, right? And we get more of a sense of it here. Then they said to Moses, the people, the Israelites, said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." The Egyptians changed their mind, so did the Israelites.
God helped Pharaoh harden his heart
Oh.
to where he's willing to do whatever he thinks he can.
Well, I don't think it took much extra work to get Pharaoh to kick in the old pride. He'd been significantly embarrassed.
They had been caught in a very dark and tragic moment, the death of the firstborn.
Yeah,
They were mourning, and the spirit of the day was, get these people out of my country.
absolutely. I mean, the Egyptians had been hurt significantly, and not just the death of the firstborn, but the plundering of the gold and the silver, which Pharaoh may not have known about right away, and the death of livestock, and the loss of a 2 million person free workforce. Not free, okay, right? The slaves were taken care of, but free-ish workforce. When you think about, even today, we've got, 350 million people in the United States? What if we lost 2 million jobs? What if we lost 2 million workers?
That's a big hit.
Even paid ones, right? Egypt was not 350 million people, and they lost 2 million. I guess it wasn't 2 million workers, probably 600,000 workers. Probably the men were working, the children and the women were maybe not. But even then, 600,000 workers, that's a pretty big jolt to Egypt. And firstborn livestock, which is, half to a third maybe of the livestock that was left, that wasn't already toast, right? Plus the gold and the silver. Egypt went from a rich nation to a desperate nation.
They went from being
But-
red basket to being basket case.
But I think the Israelites saw God do all this work, and they marched out boldly and were convinced they were going to die. They were convinced. Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Right? Got to take us out here so Pharaoh can wipe us out?
If you go back up to verse 8, it says, Israel marched out defiantly,
Yeah, going out boldly.
but somewhere along the way they missed something. They missed the free food, the melons, the cucumbers, the leeks.
I don't know. I'm walking with my livestock and I see that coming after me. I might have a change of heart too. I mean, it's not like this was going to be hand-to-hand combat. This wasn't Gladiator or Braveheart. This was not gonna be good. Israel didn't have weapons. They weren't ready for war. They carried very little with them. They have a lot of things that Egypt wants. They got to believe that Pharaoh's really angry. So, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do. Egypt would be looking pretty good, staring down those guys. They're missing it, though, and we know that they are, right? How do you think? Oh, spelling error. Wah, wah, wah. How do you think Moses was feeling here? We've been tracking Moses all the way through, right? So, let's go back. People came to complain to Moses about them not being able to build things with bricks. What did Moses do? So rewind back. Do you remember? People came to complain about Moses when Pharaoh took away the straw to make the bricks. And what did Moses do? He complained to God. He turned on the wambulance, right? And it wasn't just, it was complaining, but it was also, you set me up, right? It was accusing God, right? So, what happens here? Oh, we're gonna get there. The people were calling him reckless, stubborn, mistaken. Moses, you're out of whack. Been there? People think you're out of sorts, in the wrong spot, doing the wrong thing for the wrong purpose.
The Israelites do a lot of kvetching.
Well, yeah, they run themselves in circles, and we get to see that for the next, I don't know how many hundred years. Many hundred years. Many hundreds of years. So, the other interesting thing here, because we're going to read Moses' response, and Moses has made the adjustment, or it looks like Moses has made the adjustment. I don't know that God was particularly thrilled with it, but it's better. But Moses didn't know what was next, right? We know what's going to happen. Moses didn't. He's surrounded. It told us that they surrounded them. So they got their backs to the water. They're surrounded by hundreds of chariots. They're going to wipe them out at the very, at the very best. And the worst, they're going to take them back to Egypt. Right? He didn't know what was coming next. But his response, Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent."
I like that bit.
Yep, my chief engineer at work would say, "John, shut up and color." Get your crayons out, get to work, right? The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. I think that's probably a little more polite, isn't it? So, now this I don't understand. So, interested in your thoughts. This to me is an about face. This is a new Moses. This is Moses believing. Right? He has no evidence except God said things will work out. He's put in a pinch, and he's moved from his default. This is a massive change for, I can't talk, Moses. And how is he rewarded? The Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me?" That sounds pretty sharp to me. So why? What do you think God was hoping Moses would do? What is insufficient? Go backwards. There it is. What is insufficient? I don't know either. I can't figure out why this response from Moses wasn't a hip hip hooray. And at 15, it doesn't feel like it quite was. So that's on my very long list of questions to ask when I get there. It might have been lip service. I don't know. Maybe God was expecting that after Moses had done all those things for God, that maybe Moses would have figured this out. Hey, Moses, just go split the sea. Like, you should know better, but I don't know.
He's told
I don't know.
people to zip it. So why hasn't Moses picked up on that for himself?
Well, I don't know. But, so it feels like a sharp response. Maybe it wasn't intended to be, I don't know. Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, that they will go in after them and will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. All right? It's a divine rescue and final proof. Shortening the next few verses, the pillar and the cloud protect them, keep the Egyptians away, while the Israelites start 2 million people plus livestock go across. Important that it's dry land, right? Because if it was still wet, we'd have a mud pit, and you ain't getting 2 million people through a mud pit. Pharaoh pursues, becomes confused, and Moses returns the water. All right, I know we're over, but I got 2 more slides. Well, I got a couple more slides. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Wow.
The Red Sea wasn't about getting the Israelites out of Egypt. The Red Sea wasn't for the Egyptians. It wasn't for Pharaoh. It's for the Israelites to try and get their head straight. And it worked for a while. We get the Song of Moses, tells the story of the rescue by the sea. It's included in the earliest synagogue worships. It's the oldest piece of sustained poetry in Hebrew history, declares what God has done and how it affected Israel and others, and concludes with a response from Miriam and women. So things to remember from this. I liked these 2 lessons, so we're going to talk about them. Or I'm going to mention them. Leaders rarely get the credit, but always get the blame. Next time you have an email to write to your elders, please go gentle. God often does the unexpected. All right? Moses didn't expect the sea to open. The Israelites didn't expect the sea to open. Pray with confidence for his help and guidance. Try not to tell him what to do. He'll figure it out. He's pretty creative. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, John.
Really
It's been
appreciate it.
great.